सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरि ओम। Readings from Meditation and Spiritual Life, Chapter 5, Worldly Duties and Spiritual Life. First point is, what is duty? We all busy ourselves with various kinds of activities we usually call duty, and very often we find that these activities bring only restlessness and misery. If this is true, there must be something wrong with our ordinary conception of duty. We do karma, work, but ordinarily we do not know how to turn it into yoga, a spiritual technique, a means for divine realization. Let us look at what Swami Vivekananda has taught about Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga says, first, destroy the tendency to project the tentacle of selfishness, and when you have the power of checking it, hold it in and do not allow the mind to get into the wedge of selfishness. Then you may go out into the world and work as much as you can. Mix everywhere, go where you please. You will never be contaminated with evil. There is the lotus leaf in the water cannot touch and adhere to it. So will you be in the world. This is called vairagya, dispassion or non-attachment. Without non-attachment, there cannot be any kind of yoga. Non-attachment is the basis of all yogas. The man who gives up living in the house, wearing fine clothes and eating good food and goes into the desert may be a most attached person. His only possession, his own body, may become everything to him, and as he lives, he will be simply struggling for the sake of his body. Non-attachment does not mean anything we may do in relation to our external body. It is all in the mind. The binding link of I and mine is in the mind. If we have not this link with the body and with the things of the senses, we are non-attached, wherever and whatever we may be. A man may be on a throne and be perfectly non-attached. Another man may be in rags and still very much attached. First, we have to attain this state of non-attachment and then work incessantly. Karma Yoga gives us the method that will help us in giving up all attachment. What then do we mean by duty? Of the two words, obligation and duty, obligation suggests an immediate constraint and a specific reference. For example, a man is under an obligation to support an aged widowed mother. Duty, on the other hand, usually implies less compulsion from immediate circumstances, but a greater impulsion on moral or ethical grounds. The English poet Wordsworth calls duty the stern daughter of the voice of God. We all know how sometimes we are torn asunder between duty and self-interest. Whatever we call it, for us, unillumined souls, duty implies a degree of restraint or compulsion. The case of illumined souls is different. Sri Krishna, a divine incarnation, tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, I have no duty. There is nothing in all the worlds that I have not gained and nothing that I have to gain. Yet I continue to work. Divine incarnations and illumined souls work in a spirit of freedom out of their love for the suffering mankind. In the God-man, there is no conflict of desires and consequently no conflict of duties. He has only one way of doing a thing, and that is the Godward way. Owing to ignorance, we are often confused about the nature of duty and also about the way of meeting it. Our next point is duty and selfishness. How pointedly does Swami Vivekananda tell us that our so-called sense of duty often becomes a disease. Duty becomes a disease with us. It drags us ever forward. It catches hold of us and makes our whole life miserable. It is the bane of human life. This duty, this idea of duty, is the midday summer sun which scorches the innermost soul of mankind. Look at those poor slaves to duty. Duty leaves them no time to say prayers, no time to bathe. Duty is ever on them. They go out and work. Duty is on them. They come home and think of the work for the next day. Duty is on them. It is living a slave's life. At last, dropping down in the street and dying in harness like a horse. This is duty as it is understood. The only true duty is to be unattached and to work as free beings, to give up all work unto God. We become slaves of duty and make our whole life miserable. We must gain a better understanding of where our duty lies and how to perform it. How often we find that before we have learned to solve our own problems, we work to help others, not out of love but for the sake of self gratification. They are certainly are selfless souls, eager to serve others. But in this strange world, which one of our older Swamis once named God's great lunatic asylum, there are many busybodies who, because they are frustrated in life or do not care to take up the humdrum tasks close at hand, go about inflicting themselves on others to satisfy their own vanity. They need my loving service, the egocentric ones declare. We human beings are so full of self love that we cannot imagine that others may dislike us just as much as we dislike them. A psychologist once said this to a group of girls who were very much surprised by what they heard, for self love does not easily admit the thought that one may heartily be disliked. There is another type of self centered persons who seem to be over anxious to make others happy and have no time for prayer or meditation. They are bent on saving the world by joining clubs or bridge parties, societies, dinners, or political committees that give them some self importance for a while. But when the novelty wears off, or there is a lull in chatter or activity, they at once feel miserable and dissatisfied. Without mincing words, Swami Vivekananda says, how easy it is to interpret slavery as duty, the morbid attachment of flesh for flesh as duty. Men go out into the world and struggle and fight for money or for any other thing to which they get attached. Ask them why they do it. They say it is a duty. It is the absurd greed for gold and gain, and they try to cover it with a few flowers. By covering selfishness with flowers, we cannot perform any real duty in a spirit of detachment and make it a part of an integrated spiritual life. Self centered duty may bring us many problems and create new bondage. Next point is several faces of the ego. Human beings are strange combinations of various elements. According to William James, most persons have as many different social selves as there are distinct groups of persons about whose opinion they care. We have dual, even multiple personalities. We are one self in business, another in church, still another at home. We hesitate to do in public what we gladly do in private life. Our many selves are sometimes quite incompatible with one another and so create endless confusion for us. There is the story of a grocer who had always done business on Sundays until he and his family attended a revival meeting and became converted. The following Sunday, when a neighbor's child knocked at the door for her milk, the grocer's little daughter leaned from an upper window and said, did not you know we all got converted last week? After this, if you want to buy milk on Sundays, you will have to go round to the back door. But it is not only simple folk who deceive themselves in this way. Even highly placed persons often live double lives. This story is told of a certain elector of Cologne in Germany, who was also an archbishop. One day he used profane words in the presence of a farmer who could not conceal his astonishment. Trying to justify himself, he said, "My good man, I am swearing not as an archbishop, but as a prince." For which the intelligent farmer replied, "But, your highness, when the prince goes to hell, what will become of the archbishop?" We all must remember that if we separate private and public lives and follow opposite codes of conduct, we cannot help paying a very heavy penalty in the form of restlessness and double bondage. We certainly create a hell in our own lives and lay a train of evil consequences. There are false duties as there are real duties. In life, it is not always easy to determine which action is right and which is wrong. According to law, it is wrong to kill anybody during times of peace, but in times of war, it becomes the duty of every man, especially when he joins the army, to kill as many enemies as possible. According to Hindu religion, it is wrong to kill a cow because the cow has become an emblem of motherhood. But for a Muslim, it is meritorious to slaughter a cow in the celebration of certain festivals. Again, while the Hindu has always practiced ahimsa or non injury as a duty, the Muslims are formerly praised for killing the infidels, and during the Middle Ages, Christian inquisitors considered it their duty to burn heretics at the stake in order to save Mother Church. Thus, there are duties and duties. As Swami Vivekananda declares, to give an objective definition of duty is entirely impossible. Yet, there is duty from the subjective side. Any action that makes us go Godward is a good action and is our duty. Any action that makes us go downward is evil and is not our duty. According to the great Hindu philosopher Ramanuja, good is that which leads to expansion of the soul, and evil is that which makes the soul contract. Our next point is the concept of duty in Hinduism, Varnashrama Dharma. Hindu religion institutes four orders of society, each with a definite set of duties: the spiritual man, the warrior, the trader, and the laborer. There are also special obligations for each of these according to their stage of growth, viz., those of the student, the householder, the man retired from active life, and the monk. In ancient Hindu culture, all these ways of life were distinct and sharply defined. But in modern times, Western socio-political ideas and technology have changed all this. Now there is confusion of rights and duties, and an ever increasing number of individuals who do not know where they belong to or what they should do. According to Hindu teaching, each man has his dharma or the righteousness that will put him on the path of God. Dharma is the all comprehensive law of being which serves to integrate the entire life of man with the deep cosmic rhythm expressing itself through the individual and society as a whole. There is a unity of spirit with infinite manifestations. The great lesson of the Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures is that the individual, as a part of a community, is also a part of an indivisible cosmic whole. In ancient Hindu scriptures, there is the symbol of a mighty being from whose mouth issues the Brahmin, the spiritual man, with his passions under control and possessing knowledge, uprightness, and purity. From his arm, the warrior, from his loins, the trader and farmer, whose duty is to provide food and means of human living. From his feet, the laborer who performs the hard work of the world. All orders of society are indispensable parts of the whole, like the parts of the human body. After the completion of the stages of the student and the householder, there is time for the life of retirement, and perhaps further for the life of the anchorite meditating in solitude, free from all attachments. If every individual in all stages of his life is integrated with the underlying cosmic rhythm, he will promote not only his own welfare but also that of all around him. That is the highest duty for each one of us. The cosmic being is often represented with multiple hands and feet to remind us of the many manifestations of the absolute unity. Each man is an actor on the world stage and must learn to play his own part as well as he can. No two of us have the same part to play. The American Declaration of Independence states all men are created equal. Now we all know that no two persons are alike either in outer or inner life. How then can they be equal? Vedanta replies, the same spirit dwells in all, but so far as mental and physical capacities and tendencies are concerned, men are not equal and differ greatly from one another. There is sameness and equality at the spiritual plane, but infinite variety at all other planes. The great scholar and philanthropist Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar once asked Sri Ramakrishna, has God endowed some with more power and others with less? The master replied, as the all pervading spirit, he exists in all things, even in the ant, but the manifestations of his power are different in different beings. Otherwise, how can one person put 10 to flight while another cannot face even one? And why do all people respect you? Have you grown a pair of horns? You have more compassion and learning. Therefore, people honor you and come to pay you their respects. The Hindu view teaches each man to take things as they are, find out his own capacity, discover the truth of his own being, and then follow his law of growth, his sadharma. He will then be clear about his duty to himself and to society. A certain young householder came to Sri Ramakrishna and said that he had decided to renounce the world and become a sannyasin. The master advised him to return to his family. Oh, my father in law can maintain them. The would be monk replied. Have you no sense of honor? Sri Ramakrishna asked him. After scolding him, he asked the young man to find a job and maintain his family. There is dharma for each individual, for every stage of ordinary life, and even the most workaday life partakes of the cosmic rhythm. By fulfilling the duties of life in the proper way, every man may attain spiritual progress. There is no question of superiority or inferiority of work or of the station in life. Everybody must strive for spiritual perfection. This is the central message of the Bhagavad Gita and is clearly stated in the verse. Man attains the highest spiritual perfection by worshipping through his work the Lord from whom all work proceeds and who permits all beings. There are two paths before us. First, the path of legitimate worldly achievement and enjoyment. If properly regulated, this culminates naturally in the second path, namely the path of divine realization and freedom from all bondage. One may choose either of these according to one's capacity. The path to avoid at all costs is that of adharma or unrighteousness, which is fraught with passion, falsehood, and greed. If material prosperity results from activity in the world, it should be shared with others and should be utilized for the promotion of the spiritual welfare of oneself as well as that of others. Our next point is duties of the householder. In the Hindu scheme of social life, the householder is looked upon as the mainstay of society. It is necessary that children should be taught to contribute to the general welfare and security of the society. It is written in the Manusmriti, just as all living beings depend upon air for their existence, souls of people belonging to other stages of life depend on the householder for their sustenance. However, the householder's life is not considered to be one given to sense pleasures. In Sri Krishna's advice to his disciple Uddhava, this point is stressed again and again. Sri Krishna says, always the householder must remember that the ideal good lies not in enjoyment but in the attainment of knowledge as the individual life becomes part of the cosmic whole. A devotee, having worshipped the divine spirit through the household duties, may retire into the forest to devote himself entirely to spiritual disciplines and purify his heart. According to the Hindu scriptures, the householder has 5 kinds of duties to discharge. These are worship of gods, study of the scriptures, helping fellow beings, offering oblation to ancestors, and protecting animals. These duties are called Panchamahayagya, that is, the great fivefold sacrifice. And all these duties are to be performed not as a drudgery but in a spirit of service, in a spirit of worship. When one discharges one's duties in this spirit, they do not lead to bondage. On the contrary, they help one in spiritual life. Vedanta aims at integrating duty, service, and worship. If an activity cannot be linked with our spiritual life, it is not to be called duty. If you find that a particular work is dragging you away from God, do not do it. All kinds of work must take us nearer and nearer to God. As Sri Krishna tells Uddhava in the Bhagavatam, he who worships me constantly and steadfastly through the performance of his duty, knowing me as the supreme goal, such a one becomes endowed with knowledge and realization and soon attains to my being. All duties, if accompanied by devotion to me, lead to liberation. This is the way to blessedness. Om Santi 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.